Silence fell over 5,000 hardened sailors as the crisp sound of a palm striking an officer's cheek echoed across the asphalt. A decorated Navy admiral had just assaulted a seemingly unremarkable female lieutenant. He wanted to make an example. Instead, he just awoke a classified Pentagon nightmare. Heat radiated off the sprawling asphalt of Naval Amphibious Base Coronado, distorting the crisp white uniforms of 5,000 assembled sailors, Marines, and special warfare operators. Morning sun beat down relentlessly, but no one moved. A base-wide muster of this magnitude was rare, a spectacle of military discipline demanded by the newly appointed commander of naval operations, Admiral Roswell Stone. Stone was a man carved from the rigid wood of Pentagon bureaucracy. He had spent his 30-year career navigating the treacherous waters of Washington politics, securing funding, and attending diplomatic galas. Combat was an abstract concept to him, a messy affair handled by rough men while he orchestrated the grand, polished symphony of the Navy from a safe distance. He was notorious for his draconian adherence to uniform regulations and his absolute intolerance for anything he perceived as a lack of deference. To Stone, the military was a machine of compliance, and he was its chief engineer. Slowly, deliberately, Stone marched down the endless columns of personnel, flanked by his nervous aide, Commander David Rossi, and the base commander, Captain Bradley Hayes. Stone's eyes darted left and right, actively hunting for the slightest infraction, a scuffed shoe, an improperly aligned ribbon, a gaze that wasn't locked precisely at attention. He had already berated 2 young ensigns for microscopic uniform violations, his booming voice echoing off the concrete barracks, ensuring every soul on the tarmac heard his reprimands. Midway through the formation stood the Logistics and Support Battalion. They were the unsung cogs of the Special Warfare Machine Supply Clerks, Transport Coordinators, and Administrative Officers. Buried within the 3rd rank of this unassuming unit stood Lieutenant Claire Jenkins. On paper, Lieutenant Jenkins was a mid-level acquisitions officer, responsible for the procurement of specialized communications gear. Physically, she was unremarkable to the untrained eye. Standing 5'7", with her hair pulled back into a severe, regulation-perfect bun, she blended seamlessly into the sea of white uniforms, but anyone looking closely would notice the anomaly in her posture. While the young supply clerks around her locked their knees and sweat nervously under the Admiral's approach, Claire stood with a relaxed, grounded stillness. It was the loose, terrifying calm of an apex predator resting in the tall grass. Her eyes, a striking, pale icy blue, stared straight ahead, completely devoid of the anxiety that permeated the rest of the formation. Stone's polished black shoes clicked to a sudden halt directly in front of her. Something about Lieutenant Jenkins rubbed the Admiral the wrong way immediately. Perhaps it was the lack of fear radiating from her, or perhaps it was the way her eyes seemed to look completely through him, viewing the powerful, 3-star Admiral as nothing more than a mild obstruction in her line of sight. "Lieutenant," Stone barked, his voice sharp enough to cut glass. Claire did not flinch. "Admiral." Her voice was quiet, even, and entirely devoid of the trembling reverence Stone expected. Stone stepped closer, invading her personal space, his face turning a mottled shade of crimson. He scanned her uniform, desperate to find a flaw to justify his rising, irrational anger. Her uniform was flawless. The creases were sharp enough to draw blood. Her cover was positioned at the exact millimeter mandated by regulations. Frustrated by her perfection, he locked onto her demeanor. "Are you aware of who you are addressing, Lieutenant Stone hissed, leaning in so close she could smell the stale coffee and mints on his breath. "Yes, Admiral," Claire replied, her tone remaining completely flat. Her pale eyes remained locked dead ahead, staring into the middle distance. She was utilizing a dissociation technique taught only in the highest, darkest tiers of survival training, effectively tuning the angry man out. "Look at me when I speak to you," Stone roared, his voice booming across the silent tarmac. Thousands of eyes shifted slightly, tracking the escalating confrontation. "Naval regulations dictate I maintain the position of attention, sir." "Eyes front," Claire stated calmly. It was a factual statement, entirely correct, but delivered with an absolute lack of emotional submission. Stone's ego, inflated by decades of unchallenged authority, shattered. In his mind, this lowly supply clerk was openly defying him in front of 5,000 personnel. The disrespect was a virus, and he felt the overwhelming need to violently eradicate it before it spread. Without another word, Admiral Stone raised his right hand and brought it across Claire's face in a vicious, open-handed strike. The sound was a sharp, sickening crack that echoed across the quiet base. Gasps rippled through the front ranks of the regular sailors. Commander Rossi took a horrified step back, the clipboard slipping from his grasp. Captain Hayes turned pale, his jaw dropping in absolute disbelief. Striking a subordinate was a career-ending offense, a blatant violation of the Uniform Code of Military Justice. Yet, the Admiral had just done it in broad daylight, in front of a massive audience. But the most shocking part of the ordeal was not the strike itself. It was the reaction. Claire Jenkins's head barely snapped to the side. She absorbed the blow with a terrifying, unnatural grace. She did not stumble. She did not reach up to touch her reddening cheek. She did not blink, and she certainly did not cry. Slowly, she rotated her head back to the center, her icy blue eyes locking directly onto Stone's face. For a fraction of a second, Stone saw something in those eyes that made his blood run cold. It wasn't insubordination. It was a calculation. The look of someone deciding precisely how many seconds it would take to dismantle him. Far in the back of the formation, where the shadow dwellers of Naval Special Warfare Development Group, DEV-GRU, stood in their separate ranks. A dangerous shift occurred. 4 massive, bearded operators silently stepped forward, breaking rank. Their hands twitched, muscles coiled tight. They were ready to cross the tarmac and tear the Admiral apart. Claire caught the movement in her peripheral vision. Without moving her head, she gave a microscopic, nearly imperceptible shake of her head. "Stand down." The DEV-GRU operators froze, their jaws clenched. But they obeyed the silent command, oblivious to the deadly force he had just barely avoided. Stone puffed out his chest, trying to mask the sudden tremor in his hands. He had expected her to crumble, to weep, to apologize. Her stone-cold reaction unnerved him deeply, forcing him to double down. "Master-at-arms," Stone bellowed, his voice cracking slightly. "Arrest this officer, escort her to the brig immediately. I want her charged with gross insubordination, disrespect to a superior commissioned officer, and conduct unbecoming. She will be court-martialed and stripped of her rank by Friday." 2 heavily armed military police officers rushed forward, looking entirely bewildered. They approached Claire hesitantly. "Lieutenant, please come with us." One of the MPs whispered, clearly uncomfortable with the situation. Claire executed a perfect, crisp salute to the furious Admiral, turned on her heel with robotic precision, and walked away with the MPs, leaving a stunned, silent base in her wake. Coffee tasted bitter in Admiral Roswell Stone's mouth as he paced the length of the base commander's office. He had commandeered the spacious suite at Coronado immediately after the muster, determined to push through Lieutenant Jenkins's court-martial paperwork before the day was out. I want her destroyed. Rossi, Stone snapped, throwing his empty mug into the trash can. I want her dishonorably discharged. I want her pension gone. You do not disrespect a 3-star flag officer and walk away. Commander Rossi sat at a laptop, his fingers trembling slightly as he typed. Admiral, sir. The optic of striking an officer. The optics are that discipline will be maintained, Stone interrupted, slamming his palms on the heavy oak desk. She challenged me. In front of the men, if I let that slide, the entire chain of command crumbles. Pull her service jacket. Now. Rossi clicked furiously, accessing the Navy's central personnel database. He typed in her name, Claire Jenkins, and her service number. A loading wheel spun on the screen for a few seconds before a red banner flashed across the monitor. Access denied. Clearance level insufficient. Rossi frowned. That's strange. I'm getting a bounce back. Let me try her DODID. He typed the numbers in again. This time, the screen went entirely black. A single line of white text appeared in the center. Record classified. Executive Order 13,526. Contact Department of the Navy. Special Access Programs. Admiral. Rossi swallowed hard. I can't access her file. It's locked behind a SAP, a Special Access Program. Stone stopped pacing, his brow furrowing in confusion. That's impossible. She's a logistics officer, a supply clerk. Give me the keyboard. Stone shoved Rossi aside and logged in using his own 3-star command credentials, which granted him access to nearly every file in the Pacific Fleet. He entered Jenkins's information. The screen blinked, and a file finally opened. Stone smiled triumphantly, but the smile vanished instantly. The digital document was heavily redacted. Entire pages were blacked out. Her date of birth, her hometown, her training schools all hidden behind thick digital black bars. The only readable text was her name, her current ghost billet as an acquisitions officer, and a massive, glowing watermark stamped across the background, top secret / sensitive compartmented information. Before Stone could comprehend what he was looking at, the heavy wooden door to the office burst open. Captain Bradley Hayes, the Coronado base commander, strode in, looking incredibly pale. He wasn't alone. Behind him walked a man wearing a dark civilian suit, possessing a quiet, dangerous aura that screamed intelligence agency. Captain Hayes. What is the meaning of this? Stone demanded, gesturing to the civilian. I'm in the middle of drafting a court-martial. You need to stop typing. Admiral, Hayes said, his voice unusually tight. He closed the door firmly and locked it. You have no idea what you've just done. The man in the suit stepped forward, holding out a black leather badge case. Admiral Stone, I'm Special Agent Vance. Wait, no Vance. Correction, Special Agent Harrison, Naval Criminal Investigative Service, Special Operations Division. Harrison didn't wait for permission to speak. 10 minutes ago, I received 4 frantic calls from the Pentagon, 2 from JSOC Command at Fort Liberty, and 1 very angry message from the director of the CIA. They all wanted to know why a conventional fleet admiral just assaulted their most lethal asset on a public tarmac. Stone laughed, a harsh, dismissive sound. Lethal asset, she orders radios for the supply depot. No, Admiral, she doesn't, Captain Hayes interjected softly. Lieutenant Jenkins hasn't ordered a radio in her life. The logistics billet is a cover, a paper shield to keep her off the conventional radar. Harrison stepped up to the desk, slamming a thick, physical manila folder down over Stone's keyboard. Unlike the digital file, this one bore the seal of the Joint Special Operations Command. "Let me introduce you to who you just slapped. Admiral," Harrison said coldly. "Lieutenant Claire Jenkins is a Tier 1 operator attached to Naval Special Warfare Development Group. She is their primary sniper specialist." Stone stared at the folder, his mind refusing to process the words. Women are not Tier 1 SEALs. It's physically... "She didn't go through conventional BUD/S, Harrison cut him off. "She was recruited directly out of Marine Corps Force Recon via a classified Title 50 intelligence program. She was cross-trained by DevGru because she possesses a physiological anomaly in her optical processing and a resting heart rate that allows her to shoot between heartbeats with a Macmillan TOC-3 .38 sniper rifle at distances that defy physics." Stone opened his mouth to argue, but the words died in his throat. "In classified circles," Captain Hayes continued, his voice laced with awe, "she is known as the Appalachian Angel, though the operators simply call her Wraith. She holds the current JSOC record for confirmed kinetic strikes. 112. 112 what?" Commander Rossi whispered from the corner of the room, his face completely drained of blood. "Enemy combatants," Harrison answered smoothly. 3 years ago, during Operation Sand Viper in the mountains of Kunar Province, a 12-man SEAL reconnaissance team was pinned down by over 50 heavily armed insurgents. Air support was grounded due to a massive sandstorm. They were going to be wiped out. Harrison leaned closer to the Admiral, tapping the classified folder. "Lieutenant Jenkins was positioned on a ridge 2,000 yards away. Over the next 6 hours, in zero visibility conditions, firing through howling winds. She eliminated 22 enemy targets. She systematically dismantled the ambush, single-handedly breaking the enemy line and allowing the SEALs to exfiltrate. She received the Navy Cross for that action. It was pinned on her in a sealed room by the President of the United States. It's not on her uniform because it doesn't officially exist." Stone sank slowly into the leather chair behind the desk, the arrogant fire in his chest rapidly replacing itself with a chilling block of ice. The unblinking, dead-eyed stare she had given him on the tarmac suddenly made perfect, terrifying sense. He hadn't been looking at an insubordinate supply clerk. He had been looking down the metaphorical barrel of the deadliest weapon the United States Navy possessed. "And you," Harrison said, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper, "just struck her across the face in front of half of the West Coast Special Warfare community. The men in those back ranks, the ones who twitched. That was Red Squadron, the men she saved in Kunar. If she hadn't given them a stand-down signal, they would have beaten you to death on that asphalt. Admiral. And no court in the military would have convicted them." The secure phone on the desk suddenly began to ring, a sharp, piercing electronic chirp. The caller ID screen flashed red. It was a direct line from the Pentagon. Captain Hayes looked at the phone, then back at the Admiral. "That will be General Thomas Cavanaugh, commander of JSOC. He wants a word with you, Admiral, and I highly suggest you choose your next words very carefully." Stone reached out with a trembling hand, realizing with absolute certainty that his pristine, 30-year career was about to be burned to the ground. General Thomas Cavanaugh's voice didn't yell. It was a cold, precise whisper that vibrated through the secure phone's receiver, carrying the weight of a man who commanded the United States military's most dangerous ghosts. "Admiral Stone, Kavanaugh began, the syllables clipped and devoid of any professional courtesy. I am looking at a live satellite feed of my premier Tier 1 sniper being marched into a holding cell by conventional military police. I need you to explain to me, in very simple terms, why you have compromised a classified operative, assaulted a decorated hero, and disrupted an active counter-espionage operation. Stone clutched the heavy receiver, his knuckles turning white. General, I was completely unaware of her status. She was insubordinate during a base-wide muster. Furthermore, what counter-espionage operation? This is my base. No such operation was authorized through my command. A sharp, humorless chuckle came over the line. That is precisely why you were excluded. Roswell, you are a politician in a uniform, and politicians leak. We had credible intelligence that a foreign asset was operating within Coronado's secure communications hub. Lieutenant Jenkins was inserted into the logistics battalion to monitor the suspect. Your little temper tantrum on the tarmac didn't just assault an officer. It potentially blew months of deep cover surveillance. Panic gripped Stone's chest. I will order her immediate release. General, I will have the charges expunged. You will do absolutely nothing, Kavanaugh snapped. Agent Harrison is in the room with you, correct? Yes, sir. Hand the phone to him, pack your personal belongings, and remain in that office until further notice. Your career is effectively over. Stone, the only question remaining is whether you retire quietly or face a closed-door tribunal for compromising national security. Stone handed the receiver to Agent Harrison, his hands shaking so violently he nearly dropped it. He collapsed into the leather chair, staring blankly at the wall as Harrison spoke quietly into the phone, confirming orders. Deep beneath the main administrative building, in the heavily fortified detention center of the base brig, the atmosphere was entirely different. The fluorescent lights buzzed softly over the solitary confinement cells. Inside cell block 3, Lieutenant Claire Jenkins sat perfectly still on the edge of the rigid metal cot. She had politely surrendered her belt and shoelaces to the bewildered military police officers, offering no resistance. But she wasn't resting. She was working, less than 10 feet away. In the cell directly across the narrow corridor sat Chief Petty Officer Brian Miller. Miller was a senior communications tech with top-secret clearance, and he was currently awaiting transfer to a federal penitentiary for a supposedly routine charge of embezzling unit funds. Claire knew the truth. Miller wasn't an embezzler. He was a highly sophisticated mole working for a foreign intelligence service, caught trying to siphon secure encryption keys. Naval intelligence had quietly detained him under the guise of financial crimes to avoid alerting his handlers that his cover was blown. However, since his arrest, Miller had refused to speak. He knew the CIA and NCIS couldn't legally torture him, and he was confident his handlers would eventually orchestrate his extraction or elimination. For weeks, JSOC and Naval Intelligence had been trying to find a way to get a covert operative into the brig with Miller without arousing his suspicion. Standard interrogators had failed. Undercover agents placed in his cell block were immediately sniffed out. They needed a catalyst, something so chaotic and unplanned that Miller would believe it was a genuine Navy screw-up. Claire had recognized the opportunity the moment Admiral Stone stopped in front of her on the tarmac. She had analyzed Stone's psychological profile during her morning briefing. He was a narcissist, obsessed with optics and absolute obedience. By offering zero emotional response to his aggressive posturing, she had deliberately triggered his ego, predicting with a 95% probability that he would overreact. The slap was a welcome bonus. It guaranteed her immediate, highly publicized arrest. Now, she was exactly where she needed to be. Rough morning. Lieutenant, A voice called out from across the corridor. It was Miller. He was leaning against the bars of his cell, a smirk playing on his lips. Word travels fast. Heard the new Admiral backhanded you in front of 5,000 people. Claire didn't look up immediately. She slowly smoothed the fabric of her uniform trousers, maintaining the aura of a disgraced, furious officer. Bureaucratic tyrant, Claire muttered, injecting just enough venom into her voice to sound authentic. 30 years in the Navy, and my career is destroyed because I didn't tremble when a desk jockey barked. Miller laughed, a dry, cynical sound. That's the fleet for you. They don't care about the job. They care about the polish on the shoes. I'm in here for cooking the books to buy decent gear for my guys. Now they want to send me to Leavenworth. Claire finally looked up, letting her icy blue eyes meet his. She recognized the subtle scanning motion in his gaze. He was assessing her, looking for tells, trying to determine if she was a plant. But Claire was a Tier 1 operator who had spent days buried in snowbanks behind enemy lines. She possessed absolute control over her micro-expressions. She gave him nothing but the bitter resentment of a wronged sailor. I had access to the new encrypted SATCOM procurement files. Claire lied smoothly, weaving the bait. I was supposed to finalize the transfer tomorrow. Now Stone probably locked the whole system down just to spite me. Miller's smirk vanished. His eyes narrowed slightly. The encrypted SATCOM files were the exact target he had been trying to steal before his arrest. If this disgraced logistics officer had the access codes fresh in her memory, she was a gold mine. SATCOM, huh? Miller asked, his voice dropping an octave, taking a cautious step closer to the bars. That's high-level stuff. You must have a photographic memory to handle those procurement keys without writing them down. I do, Claire said softly, turning her head to stare at the blank cinder block wall. And a lot of good it does me now. The hook was set. Footsteps echoed heavily down the sterile corridor. The heavy steel door at the end of the block hissed open, revealing Agent Harrison and Captain Hayes. They walked with purposeful, urgent strides, stopping directly in front of Claire's cell. Lieutenant Jenkins, Harrison said, his voice carrying the authority of his federal badge. The base commander has reviewed the incident. Admiral Stone's orders have been countermanded. You are being released immediately. The charges are dropped. Miller watched from across the hall, a flicker of desperation crossing his face. His golden ticket was walking out the door. Claire stood up, her face a mask of mild surprise. Dropped just like that. There are extenuating circumstances regarding the Admiral's conduct, Captain Hayes said stiffly, avoiding her gaze. He unlocked the cell door. Please, gather your things. We have a car waiting to take you back to your quarters. Claire stepped out of the cell, pausing just for a fraction of a second to look back at Miller. She let a tiny, almost imperceptible smirk touch the corner of her mouth, a look of pure, unadulterated triumph that only Miller could see. Miller's training finally cracked. The sudden loss of the asset, combined with the realization that this woman was completely unbothered by her circumstances, triggered a cascading failure in his logic. He panicked. "Wait!" Miller shouted, gripping the bars of his cell. "I want to make a deal. I have the secure routing numbers for the Beijing drop. I'll trade them for immunity and a transfer to a civilian prison." Harrison froze. He slowly turned to look at the chief petty officer. For a month, Naval Intelligence had thrown everything they had at Miller, and he hadn't spoken a single word about Beijing or any dead drops. Claire didn't break stride. She walked past Harrison, pausing only to retrieve her belt from the bewildered guard at the desk. "Agent Harrison," Claire said calmly, her voice echoing off the concrete walls. "It seems the suspect is ready to cooperate. I suggest you initiate the debriefing protocols." Harrison stared at her in utter disbelief. He suddenly realized what had just happened. The assault, the arrest, the quiet conversation in the cell block. It was all a psychological operation, orchestrated on the fly by a sniper who never missed her mark. She had used Admiral Stone as a blunt instrument to break a foreign spy, all while maintaining perfect military bearing. "Understood, Lieutenant," Harrison managed to say, awe bleeding into his professional tone. "We will take it from here." By sunset, the sprawling tarmac of Naval Amphibious Base Coronado was empty, bathed in the golden, dying light of the California sun. In the commander's office, Admiral Roswell Stone sat silently as two agents from the Department of Defense Inspector General's office packed his classified files into secure briefcases. He had signed his immediate, mandatory retirement papers 20 minutes prior. His 30-year career had ended, not with a grand ceremony and a parade, but with a quiet, humiliating signature behind a locked door. He would keep his pension, but he would never hold a security clearance or a command position again. Down by the perimeter fence, near the restricted docks where the black-hulled stealth boats of the special boat teams rested in the water, a dark SUV idled quietly. Claire Jenkins stood by the water's edge, wearing civilian clothes, a simple tactical jacket and jeans. The severe bun was gone, her hair falling loosely around her shoulders. She looked at the churning dark water, her pale blue eyes reflecting the distant navigation lights of the bay. Agent Harrison stepped out of the SUV and walked up beside her, handing her a secure sat phone. "Miller Sang," Harrison said quietly. "Gave up 2 handlers in San Diego and a sleeper cell in Norfolk. The FBI is rolling them up right now. General Kavanaugh sends his regards. He also said you have 72 hours of leave before you're needed at Fort Liberty for a new deployment workup." "Understood," Claire replied, her voice soft against the ocean breeze. "I have to ask." "Claire," Harrison said, looking at the faint red mark that still lingered on her left cheek. "Did you know Stone was going to hit you?" Claire turned her head, looking at the seasoned intelligence agent with that same unnerving calmness she had displayed on the tarmac. "I knew his pride was his critical vulnerability," she answered simply. "In a firefight, you look for the enemy's weak point and you exploit it. Stone's weak point was his need for absolute submission. I denied him that. The physics of his reaction were entirely predictable." She took the sat phone, slipping it into her jacket pocket. "Besides," she added, a ghost of a smile finally appearing on her face, "it got me into the room with Miller, didn't it?" Harrison shook his head, a mixture of respect and mild terror washing over him. "You're a terrifying woman. Wraith." "Just doing my job. Agent Harrison," she replied, turning to walk toward the waiting vehicle. "Just doing my job." She slipped into the darkness of the SUV, the tinted windows hiding her from the world once again. She wasn't a logistics officer, and she wasn't a victim. She was the Navy's most lethal phantom, slipping back into the shadows where she belonged, leaving a trail of dismantled enemies both foreign and domestic in her wake. If this high-stakes military thriller kept you on the edge of your seat, smash that like button and share it with your friends. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel and ring the bell so you never miss another deep dive into the hidden world of tactical espionage and legendary operators. Drop a comment below. What would you have done in the Admiral's shoes?